And you mentioned that you had flown over directly from Copenhagen just to meet with us and our students today. So thank you very much. You have had some very extraordinary experiences, both as leaders of business in the US and in Europe. Can you describe HR's role, if there's any difference at all, in how you see HR playing a role in perhaps in the United States compared to some other places?
Yeah, I think I've seen HR now across different industries. And I think sometimes industry is as much a differentiator as it is regions of the world. Um, but I think fundamentally, world class HR comes back to the same sets of questions and beliefs and approaches. The context is obviously different between, for example, in a cosmetics business, which was very much about you could generate a difference in sales very, very quickly through decisions around people and talent. Um, in a long cycle upstream oil business where the investments are very long term, it takes longer to, it's just a much longer cycle. So industries are different. And then I think the different regions provide a different context. So, for example, in the United States, I think the sort of the underlying culture is one in which there's just a belief that the individual can make a huge difference, that the individual is able to um, achieve whatever he or she sets out to achieve. And I think that's one of the things that gives the US just such a tremendous energy. Um, and if that's true, then just the acceptance of the concept of talent management, that a few people make a disproportionate impact on a company, that it's okay for people to be paid more relative to the contribution. I think that comes more naturally within a US cultural context. I think in different parts of Europe, and it's dangerous to sort of generalize about Europe because I think the
Sure,
UK
yes.
is different versus Southern Europe or in my case in Denmark. I do think that the sort of social context, particularly around the shareholder, is important, but the shareholder consideration isn't the only consideration in the decision making process. They're quite often family owned, controlled companies. Where in the case of Maersk, we're lucky that we are family controlled, and the number one consideration is we've been here for 110 years and we want to be here for another 110 years. And so the decision making context then is quite different than if you're in a sort of quarterly earnings, Wall Street kind of environment. And there's a lot that's good about that. I can just sort of promise you. But along with that, then there's a different context around, well, how much should one differentiate talent versus everybody else within the company? How much is it acceptable to differentiate pay and performance? And so they're the same fundamental approaches. You're just in a different kind of social context. You quite often, I think, end up with quite similar answers, but the series of conversations that you go through are different. And I've really enjoyed sort of testing as I've come from sort of US driven companies, testing how much of that is really true based upon experience in different geographies now.
That actually sounds really interesting. I'd like to have you back for a conversation just about that. But here at the Center for Executive Succession, of course, one of the things that we're very interested in is executive succession. So, can you share with us a little bit about HR's role in C-suite succession?
I think fundamentally HR needs to own C-suite succession. To me, it's sort of the highest form of talent management if you believe that um, a few roles make a disproportionate impact on the future of the company. Logically, you would get to some of those roles are going to be the C-suite roles. Um, and so I've seen different practices across companies. I think it depends upon the relationship between the board and management in terms of Is this shared ownership? Is this a board-driven process supported by management? Is this a co-owned process? But whatever the answer is there, I think the chief HR officer, needs to make sure that there is a process, and sometimes that is not a given. That there is a different definition which is coming from the board about what is the profile for success, not today, but for the future. So I encourage the board to sort of tell us, well, against the strategy that we've got, what does the CEO or the C-suite officer of the future need to be able to do? And then making sure that the board is getting access both to external talent, whether that's through meeting or profiling, or internal talent, just so that they understand the range of choices that's available. And I think the one thing that you can bring uniquely as a chief HR officer is your experience of the talent as a colleague, as a potential future leader for the company. So I think we are expected to have a perspective, to have a point of view on the talent, and to bring some balance to that, because we see them kind of all day, every day, and that's different than the half hour in the boardroom or the set piece presentation. So I think we can add some value by sort of rounding out the perspectives and offering points of view that wouldn't be obvious within the boardroom.
So that sounds like a fairly unique thing, or correct me if I'm wrong. Is it often the case that many other C-suite executives, the CFO, who actually may be more inclined to be the next CEO, are the rest of the C-suite people invited in to give those, kind of be the honest broker the way the CHRO is?
No, I don't think so. No, I think it's one of the unique sort of franchises of the chief HR officer, is to that is a CHRO driven process. And there are other things that the CFO does uniquely that we don't play on, and this is one where I think the chief HR officer needs to own it. And it's not really a shared management team process, just because of the confidentiality, the delicacy around it. So it is it's a very delicate process, and I think takes some very careful management. And it is not at all easy, because you've also got an external board of directors that feels, a very high sense of accountability about this choice, because it's their number one role as a board. And obviously, there will be different points of view on the answer. So it's easy for me to describe aspirationally how it works, and then obviously life is a little bit different depending on where each board starts from. Is it a planned succession? Is it a succession at a time when the business is doing well, where the strategic tough issues have been dealt with, or is it a business that's going into some significant issues? So all of that kind of dictates the process that you end up running.
So you've traveled a very long way for a short visit, and we deeply appreciate it. So
thank you.
Thank you very much for joining us. You've listened to another CHRO Conversation. For all of us here associated with the Masters of Human Resource program at the University of South Carolina, thank you for joining us.